With the surrender of Nazi Germany in early May 1945, Berlin fell under the iron grip of the Red Army, which had claimed the city following a grueling and bloody battle. Beneath the garden of the Reich Chancellery, Hitler's bunker was hidden, seized by the Soviets, on the 2nd of May 1945. In their relentless pursuit of evidence of Hitler's demise for a skeptical Stalin in Moscow, and to extinguish rumors of his escape, Soviet officers sealed off the bunker from prying eyes, granting access to only a privileged few non-Soviet intelligence personnel. Despite an agreement with the Western Allied powers to divide Berlin into 4 occupation zones, the Soviets deliberately delayed and obstructed efforts by the British, Americans, and French to penetrate Berlin through Soviet-controlled Eastern Germany and assume control of their designated zones. The first Western Allied troops finally set foot in Berlin on the 4th of July 1945. This was a full 2 months after the city had fallen to the Red Army. By then, the early stages of the Cold War were already casting long shadows. The newly arrived Allied troops were keen to explore the shattered Reich Chancellery, Hitler's former seat of power, and the Fuhrerbunker, where he had met his dramatic end. However, the Soviets remained steadfast in their reluctance to grant access, particularly to the bunker, which had deteriorated drastically since its capture. When the Red Army initially took control, the bunker's pumps, ventilation, and lighting systems were fully operational, powered by a robust U-boat engine. Yet once the power was extinguished, Soviet troops left the bunker in a chaotic state, ransacking the 2-story structure in a frantic search for evidence. The rooms were either looted or meticulously searched, and combined with the hasty abandonment by the SS on the night of May 1, 1945, the bunker was reduced to a deplorable state. The SS had also set fire to some of the upper rooms, leaving them in an even more dire condition. Berlin has a very high water table. With the pumps switched off, water began to seep into the lower bunker where Hitler had met his end, leaving a few inches of murky brown water in all the rooms. Sealed off from the outside world and unventilated, the bunker quickly became a breeding ground for mold, which crept over the walls, the remaining furniture, and abandoned clothing. The once notorious lair of the Führer had transformed into a dark, dingy, and damp underground cavity, bearing little resemblance to its appearance during the last desperate months of the war. Some Allied soldiers and war correspondents, driven by curiosity and the lure of history, managed to gain access to the Fuhrerbunker. Often this access was bought with cigarettes or alcohol exchanged with Soviet soldiers. Many souvenirs were taken, relics that survive today in museums or private collections. By the light of cigarette lighters or the flickering beams of handheld electric torches, journalists captured haunting photographs of the dilapidated, waterlogged rooms. Amidst this backdrop of decay and historical significance, the Allied leaders were set to meet in Potsdam. Their mission, to chart the future course of the war against Japan and to address the issues in Europe. The Soviets, ever the gracious hosts, prepared to welcome 2 of the most significant figures of the time, who would arrive on the 14th of July, 1945. U.S. President Harry S. Truman and British Prime Minister Winston Churchill. Before proceeding to Potsdam, the Soviets arranged for whirlwind tours of the battered remnants of the Nazi regime, focusing on the Reich Chancellery and the Fuhrerbunker. President Truman, surveying the ruins with a detached air, viewed the wreckage from the comfort of his vehicle, seemingly uninterested in the grim spectacle. In contrast, Churchill, the intrepid leader, was more adventurous. Accompanied by large entourages, the President and the Prime Minister traveled with their respective teams. In Churchill's inner circle were his daughter Mary Churchill, an officer in the Auxiliary Territorial Service, Field Marshal Sir Harold Alexander, a host of other generals and brigadiers, his personal physician Lord Moran, and Foreign Secretary Anthony Eden. Churchill, a figure of resilience and determination, journeyed to the Brandenburg Gate in the front passenger seat of a Royal Military Police Jeep. Despite the gravity of the moment, Churchill was lightly protected. Red Army soldiers controlled the streets, providing an uneasy peace, while Churchill's group included military policemen, his police bodyguards, and his trusted inner circle. Next on the itinerary was Hitler's bunker, a dark and foreboding labyrinth reached through a tunnel and descending flights of steps from within the Reich Chancellery building. The steps were wet and treacherous, the air thick and oppressive. It was a sweltering day, and Churchill, never known for his physical fitness, began to feel the weight of exhaustion. Carefully, he navigated the slippery steps and debris down to the upper bunker, buried deep beneath the Reich Chancellery garden. Upon reaching the halfway mark, he learned that 2 more long staircases awaited below. Deciding he had seen enough, he chose to remain behind as his daughter and several members of the party continued down to Hitler's final refuge. Churchill was directed to the Fuhrerbunker's emergency exit, the very steps from which Hitler's corpse had been carried up 2 months earlier for cremation in the garden above. Emerging through the open armored door, Churchill appeared unsteady on his feet. A Soviet sentry grasped his elbow to steady him and guided him to a battered, broken armchair, placed strategically outside the emergency exit for him to rest. The chair, as the Soviets informed him, had once belonged to Hitler himself in his bunker study. Churchill mopped sweat from his brow with a handkerchief, engaging in light conversation with members of his entourage while awaiting the return of his daughter and the rest of the group from the depths below. After a short while they re-emerged, and Churchill rose, walking a few paces to the pit where, according to the Soviets, the bodies of Hitler and his wife had been interred following their cremation on the 30th of April, 1945. He gazed into the pit, prodding with his cane at a couple of bullet-riddled jerry cans that had held the petrol used to incinerate Hitler. Then, without a word, he turned and walked away. The remainder of Churchill's time in Berlin was largely consumed by the Potsdam Conference in the company of Stalin and President Truman. 10 days later, Churchill would leave office, having lost the general election to Clement Attlee, who took over the proceedings at Potsdam. It's fascinating to reflect that after leading Britain and the Empire through World War II, one of Churchill's final acts as war leader was to visit the site of his greatest adversary's ultimate defeat and demise. Thank you for watching. Please subscribe and share.